Concorda, I move number 17, amendment number 17 in my name. Minister, this is an amendment that we discussed in detail at committee stage. Minister, the focus of this is to look at the issue of carbon tax on agricultural diesel. As you know, carbon tax is about bringing about change. It's not about bringing in more income into the exchequer. And the idea and the pitch behind carbon tax is to drive that change. So the objective is, in terms of people, that they would get out of their car and use public transport because, one, it's more carbon efficient and they'll pay less fuel taxes. But as you know, in terms of the agricultural community, they don't have that choice because we don't yet have agricultural tractors around, and it will probably be a while before we have them in this country. And because there isn't that choice there, the point I'm making is that they should not be liable to the tax. Now, I know, Minister, and when we discussed this earlier, you made the point that there is a double income tax relief for farmers. But the difficulty is that you have to be generating an income in order to actually avail of the income tax relief. And as you know, in terms of the beef sector, there will be very, very few beef farmers that will pay tax this year because of the devastating year that they've had, except a handful of beef processors in the country who will have a tax liability. So having a taxable income is the only way that they will get the relief for paying the carbon tax on their agricultural fuel. So the point I'm making is that we need to look at another mechanism to ensure that people that don't have a choice, which are farmers, they don't have an alternative available to them, that they have a mechanism to avoid paying the carbon tax on agricultural vehicles. And I think this leads into a broader issue in terms of carbon taxes, and that is that the carbon tax structure that we have in this country disproportionately impacts on people in rural Ireland. So a typical commuting family in rural Ireland will pay an extra €6 a week in carbon tax, yet the equivalent family in Dublin will pay about 30 cents a week in additional carbon tax. Now, €6 a week for a family is a significant amount of money, but they don't have the alternative transport choices available to them, so they literally just have to absorb this as an additional cost. However, in Dublin, families do have alternative choices, particularly with the bus choices subsidised by the state that are available to them. But 30 cents a week is not going to motivate any family to leave the car keys at home and get onto the bus. So it is disproportionately hitting the people that cannot avoid paying the carbon tax. So I think, and I had an amendment tabled later that the Concorda has ruled out of order, where we should be trying to encourage and restructuring our motor tax to drive the type of change that is needed based on fuel efficiency of that vehicle. And if you have a diesel car travelling in the city of Dublin, it's far less efficient than a diesel car travelling from rural Ireland to a job in Lucan or Leixlip. And if the taxation was structured on that mechanism, then it would encourage people to leave their car at home in Dublin and would not disproportionately penalise people in rural Ireland that don't have a choice. But we won't get the opportunity to discuss that. But I just want to flag this particular issue in terms of agricultural fuel, that the relief does not ensure that many farmers that don't have a taxable income will be able to avail of that relief. Thank you.
Deputy Kenny.
Just briefly to support the amendment. Living in rural Ireland, I'm very conscious of the issues, particularly in the farming community at the moment, and indeed for quite a length of time. There are very little opportunity to get tax off farmers because they make very little money by and large, particularly the farmers in smaller holdings in the west and poorer land, and they are the very farmers who will be impacted most by the carbon tax which has been spoken of, or indeed the carbon tax in general. And it's an issue that goes beyond farm, and it goes into families who live in rural areas or indeed towns out in the regions where they don't have options, where there aren't the buses, there aren't the transport, there aren't all of those things in place for to deal with them, and yet they are the ones who again are being pressed the hardest. And I think, you know, the symbolism of accepting this amendment, Minister, to state that you would accept that the agricultural sector in particular needs to get a certain sense of understanding from your government, that it does need to understand that we have got a situation where, first of all, they are not profitable, they are not making money, and secondly, they don't have alternative options. There are no such thing as electric tractors, unfortunately, and even if there were, they would be well beyond the affordability of the vast majority of farmers living in rural Ireland, similar to the issue exists with electric cars. But if you would accept the amendment, I think it would at least show that the government has some level of understanding in respect of that. Thank you.
Any other members? If not, then Minister. Minister Darcy.
It is important to note that the vast majority of greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector, methane, are not subject to carbon taxation. The main agricultural exposure to carbon taxes comes from fuel inputs, primarily through the use of MGO-marked gas oil, or green diesel as we know it in the countryside, which is subject to the low excise rate of 10.2 cents per litre. The increase in carbon tax will bring this rate to 11.8 cents per litre. The increase on marked gas oil will apply from the 1st of May 2020. The excise rate on marked gas oil compares very favourably to the excise rate applied to auto diesel, which is 49.5 cents per litre, almost 40 cents per litre in the difference between road diesel and marked gas oil. When the carbon tax in Budget 12 was made, provision for a double income tax relief for farmers to compensate for this increase, this relief continues to apply. In light of the very limited exposure of the agriculture sector to carbon tax increases and the availability of other income tax reliefs to farmers which are directly related to increase in the carbon tax rate, I do not see the benefit in conducting a report on the impact of carbon tax on the agricultural sector. I have to say, Deputy, that I live in the countryside as well. I live down a country lane, and I'm somebody who is very strongly supportive of rural planning. We had a conversation earlier in the day in relation to this about the matter that was brought up from Bord Pleanála, turning down rural once-off plannings. And the Irish rural housing stock is dispersed throughout the country. And I support that, absolutely. And I support people getting the opportunity to look for planning permission to build in the country. But if somebody lives in the country, we can't expect the state to subsidise that. The state doesn't subsidise wastewater. You put in your own septic tank, you provide your own water. Where there's a market failure with the likes of the broadband plan that we've launched, the state will step in. But you can't expect the state to do everything for rural Ireland. And I have to say, it's wrong of people to keep talking about rural Ireland being desolate and dying, because it isn't. There are so many areas, the length and breadth of the country, that are thriving and doing exceptionally well. Not everywhere is like that. And that's why we are spending billions of euros for the National Broadband Plan. That's why we have the National Rural Regeneration Plan. That's why we have the Town and Village Renewal Schemes. But you would think that none of this is happening and that it is all being spent in Dublin City and nowhere else. And that is not the case. And it is disingenuous of some deputies who say that it's all wrong in rural Ireland, because it isn't.
Minister, I'm not going to dwell on the point. I've made my point and I've made it at committee. I want to pick up on two things that you said. And the first one is that rural Ireland is not desolate. And what has been done in the Rural Regeneration Scheme and the Urban Regeneration Scheme with competitive funds, I think, encourages communities to come forward with innovative ideas. And I think it is very positive in relation to that. But the difficulty is, Minister, that the vast majority of people living in rural Ireland have to commute long distances to get to employment. Deputy Kenny spoke about it earlier. I have it in my constituency where people have to travel long distances. And if we are going to deal with the challenge that we have in the city of Dublin in terms of congestion, in terms of housing, we cannot and can never build enough houses to meet the demand that is there. We need to bring about balance. And yes, government is doing that through the incentives they're providing and so forth, and we need to continue to do that. And that's the first point. The second point that I want to make is in terms of methane, and I'm glad you brought up the issue of methane. And yes, it's not subject to carbon tax, despite the Citizens' Assembly recommending that it should, and I don't believe it should. But we do need to seriously look at the issue of carbon leakage because of the structure that we have here, and this is a European structure that is there in terms of accounting carbon. We are penalising agricultural production here in Ireland, that is agricultural production to feed the European Union. We're trying to shut down the sector here and import the product from an alternative source, which is South America, where it's moving people off the land there, where it is having a devastating impact in terms of climate, destroying the lungs of the globe, which is the Amazon basin. And we really need to look again at how we calculate and treat methane. Thank you.
Ray, I didn't say that the rural people of Ireland should be paid. So please don't say something that I did not say. Very clear that.
Sorry, sorry, Deputy. Deputy, listen.
I very clearly did not say that. You have said I said it, and you were wrong to say that about me. You did not. Okay.
Deputy Healy-Rae, let's have a bit of order.
And I want to say to Deputy Healy-Rae, we will not leave the people of rural Ireland alone. We will invest in rural Ireland, and we will continue to invest in rural Ireland. You don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear about the Town and Village Renewal Scheme. You don't want to hear about the Rural Regeneration Scheme. You don't want to hear about the National Broadband Scheme. My county of Wexford will receive...
Don't want to hear about it.
You might not agree, but you must listen to other members. Nobody has a divine right to keep interrupting here. Now,
my county of Wexford will receive €88 million to bring broadband connectivity by fibre to the 22,000 homes. You don't want to hear that because it doesn't fit into your narrative, which is rural Ireland is dead, desolate, it's finished, it's not finished, it is vibrant in many places and many areas. I want to go back to the actual item that we're discussing. The increase in terms of the carbon tax for green diesel, marked gas oil. It's 16 euros on a 1,000 litre fill of diesel. Most average to small farmers might do 3 or 4 fills of diesel. It's 50 euros in the year. That's the full amount. That's the full amount. So please, it's important for people not to overstate what it is. It's about 50 euros a year for the average to small farmer. That's the impact of what the carbon tax for marked gas oil will have on the sector. And we brought it in at a rate that is low, that is not coming in until next May. And that's about as reasonable as you can get.
Now, where stands, it's proposed by Deputy Norton, where stands amendment? Pressing it. It should have done a Waward Abadis Ta, it should have done a Ganya Abadis Neil, Shilan Gwan Cash Culture. The question is lost.